Welcome to the Diamond Report for Sunday, January 29th, 2017. This is your host, Doug Diamond. This is part 2 of what we started in the last show. So this is the Diamond Report number 7. Number 6 was the first part of this show. So if you're listening to this show and have not heard number 6, you really need to go back and listen to that one so you understand what's going on. This show is primarily about CalExit and the Geoengineered California Drought. So if you will, please go back and listen to that one instead of starting with this one. It will make much more sense. So let's go ahead and get right back into where we left off at the end of show 6, and we'll pick up right from there. And as soon as Dave Hodges and Paul Preston are done talking, it will immediately go into a short little clip from Alex Jones where he touches on this very same issue.
We're also hearing reports of large concentrations of Chinese in northern California, in very extreme portions of California, northern California. And this is based upon some conversations that I've had with people. I live in Northern California, of course, but conversations that I've had with people who've been out and about in the field and witnessed, large numbers of or heard about, and by witnesses to other people, large numbers of Chinese in various communities. So we haven't been able to pinpoint those down. We do know that there are certain communities, and I don't want to mention them because I don't have enough evidence yet, along the I-5 corridor. But, we definitely know about what's happening in Stockton, and we know about what's happening in Sacramento and West Sacramento. We know about that. So there's large numbers. They're posing as students. They're posing as employees of various businesses. The students that come here to our universities, of course, it's been our university system that has an open door to the Chinese. California students, ladies and gentlemen, the students that go to California high schools and graduate, they are put on the back burner. They do not get first choice, as they should. And first, options to get into California universities, state universities and junior colleges. That no longer happens. They are put to the end of the line, and anybody who's from China or other, like India, they get first opportunity to take the seats. And the reason is because they're getting more money for those students. But again, it's California students who get the short shift on this. That's been going on for about 15 years. And Chinese students, and this is what I've been hearing from people, when Chinese students come here to study from abroad, from China, they every year get $1 million to supplement their stay here.
Oh my goodness, this is terrible.
You see the significant power in all that.
Well, I can see that they're setting them up to integrate them into society to be some kind of sleeper cell at a future date. That's
exactly right.
And I will tell you, this is also going on in places like Ketchikan, Alaska, where I have firsthand reports. Gatlin, where they had Gatlin, Tennessee, where they had the fires.
Right.
And some people think that the Russians set the fires because their businesses were not touched. And I know a lot about the Russians. I've had Dr. Susan Hellman from Gatlinburg on my show a few times, and this is the same pattern. It's the exact same pattern.
Right. And those fires in Tennessee listen, I live in fire country. And, we've known for a long time about fires being set around here, big fires. And you hear about this all the time in California for a number of different reasons. Sometimes you hear the corruption within the Department of Forestry, Cal Fire, that, people want overtime, so they set a fire, they get overtime, that sort of thing for the fires. And, these things last for weeks sometimes. But there's deliberate fires that we know that are set by arsonists. I happened to one time work in a school area I worked in the forest many years, but one time two of my students were arrested because they set a huge fire, a deliberate arson fire in Northern California, Butte County actually, and it was thoroughly investigated. I was involved in the investigation because I was their principal, and they were Russians.
Interesting. Well, the Russians. Was it 4 years ago near the Air Force Academy north of Colorado Springs? The Russians were accused, and they have a presence, by the way, at Fort Carson in the south end of Colorado Springs. They were accused of setting the fires near the Air Force Academy. Mm-hmm. This is not new behavior. This is something that I could go through. We could dig out other examples. But so California has been infiltrated by the Chinese. How are they going to play a role with what we talked about in the previous segment, Paul, in terms of CalExit, in killing whites and taking over the state in terms of turning it into a foreign country?
Well, I think that what they're going to do is, first of all, the way that they view it in the Chinese now, in my understanding, is it's been Dianne Feinstein's husband, Richard Blum, which has been able to sell a great deal of property, farmland, as a result of the man-made drought here in California, to the Chinese. He is, of course, affiliated and backed by the Bank of China. This is Dianne Feinstein's husband, Richard Blum, one of the largest commercial brokers in the world, I understand. But it's been selling up California, buying up and then selling California farmland because the farmers can't farm because they don't have water. Shutting off the water to these farmers and allowing the water to be drained out to the ocean has been proven time and time again to be a great deal a big profit maker for real estate brokers who want to buy low and sell high. And that's what they've been doing to the Chinese, and it's all been going through Richard Blum. So they've got a big investment here in California farmland, which is the breadbasket for the world. I mean, California is a huge agricultural business. It's the biggest business we have, but it's also the access to arable farmland is enormous here. It's rich farmland. Just add water to it. I mean, and so the ability to feed millions upon millions, billions of people here in California is definitely here, and that's what's happening in China. Is that they need the farmland. And they have a particular type of farming pattern that they have, or practices that they have, that really basically squeeze all the minerals and everything out of the soil. And that's going to be interesting to see if they actually do come here and start using some of their farming techniques, because they'll destroy the countryside. That's what's happened in China already. And we have, of course, a very, very scientific, well-thought-out farming system here in California that's getting maximum yield, and we still have huge potential if we follow our farming regimes that we have here. But there's a particular problem with farmers in California in that there is a huge need. When I was doing my charter school and we were doing our FFA programs, we brought in farmers from here in Northern California, about 20 of them, for a mini conference, to discuss about what their needs were from our school, because we were going to be producing farmers and skilled workers, and we wanted to hear from them. Well, we sat around the table, and everybody who was there, the farmers that were there, were 70 years and older, except for one. And that one had inherited his farm. He was in his mid-30s. But they said, look, we have a problem because we're the last of the farmers. When we die, we don't have kids to give our farms to. Our kids have gone off and done other things. That's just been part of the pressure to get kids off of the farm. So here you have a situation where you have the people growing out of the farms. Those farms are going to ultimately fall in the hands of real estate brokers. They're going to be selling them to China. Or if the things start to pan out here, they'll just take it. So the Chinese are going to play an integral role. They want to protect their investment that they have here in California through their farmlands, and then they want to exploit it. They want what we have. They want the resources. China doesn't really care about the rest of the world. They just are concerned about Chinese. Even though America if America says boo to them and stops buying products from them, their economy is going to go crazy. But as far as food's concerned, they're going to be here to take it. And it just so happens just this year, we're starting to get all the rain. It's like they've just turned the rain back on here in California. And so this is the first wet season I can remember in 6 or 7 years that we're having this kind of has an semblance of normalcy. So when people start talking about geoengineering and, is there geoengineering or not, there absolutely is geoengineering and weather warfare. It's happening here in California. It has been for the last probably 8 years. And again, we're draining our reservoirs. Hello. Why? Because they don't want any water reserves. They want to say that we're in a drought. But it's interesting that this year, with all the things that are happening, it's like their program is coming together now, and they're starting to irrigate basically California in preparation for next year's growing season. I can see it. You can just see this happening. Okay. So there's a lot of things happening, a lot of moving parts, and geoengineering is playing a part in it. We see the geoengineering here in California. All we do is look up in the skies, and we can see them laying the stuff down.
Hope you're sitting down, Paul, because we have had this happen in our conversations more than once. I've written a lot about Dianne Feinstein and how she and her husband have enriched themselves illegally when she's occupied key committee positions and she's directed government work her husband's way. Right. She went into the Senate as a millionaire, and now she may be a billionaire. Now, to the point of what you're saying here, I had written stories prior to about the Chinese ghost cities that are these major metropolitan areas. They're built without anybody in them. Right. And Goldman Sachs has a hand in it, and so does Dianne Feinstein's husband. And what they started to do in China, and I don't know if you're aware of this, they'll back the military trucks up, and you got 10 minutes to grab your stuff, get on the truck, get the hell out, and they've got the bayonets on them. Right. And they're actually forcing hundreds of thousands of Chinese from their rural areas where they're concerned about revolution into these Chinese ghost cities that Bloom has a part in. And he's all the way through this now. And by the way, George Soros is part of this too. This is no coincidence. Now we come back to California. I ran a story oh gosh, Paul, I don't remember, 2 years ago, I've got to go back and research it, but about 2 years ago, I ran a story that talked about how the drought was being artificially manufactured. I went through a lot of the climatological data. I had pretty good evidence. And I said, and this is also what I'm getting. The UN is going to occupy California as they force people out because of the drought.
Right.
And I linked it into your part of the state. And I said, this is the EPA's part where they're shutting off water rights to ranchers and farmers who've had 150-year compacts. And that's when I delved into the state of Jefferson.
Right.
It's a small world, isn't it?
Right. That's what the state of Jefferson's all about, is protecting those water rights. I mean, that's a big part of it, because they're just stealing the water. And, here in California. But the other part of it, I want to get to this weather warfare business, because that's exactly what they've been waging on California, is weather warfare.
Yes.
In my opinion. Now, I was not a believer in geoengineering. I got to tell you, this is a new 4-year experience for me. If you would have asked me 4.5 years ago, or even when I started Agenda 21 Radio, I would have said, no, come on. And I did say, oh, come on. And the first time I was approached with it, I said, oh, come on. And so then I started, I'm a science guy. I taught sciences for years. It's my background. And so then I said to myself, well, let's think about this for a minute, Paul. And so I started doing research, and I found patents for the chemicals that they're spraying. Now, this is where it really hit home. The patents belongs, I believe, to a James Chang. And he was working for Hughes Aircraft in Southern California when he came up with a whole series of chemicals that they're spraying on us, including the aluminum oxides, the nanoparticulates. They're supposed to reflect the light, but then, in fact, they're not doing that. They're acting as desiccants, and they wake up the moisture in the air and put it in the clouds, and then the moisture can be transferred to other parts of the globe, which is the successful thing that they do here in Northern California. We can bear witness to it every day, because the jet stream collides with us, and we can actually see, where the jet stream is located up here in Northern California, where we're at. We have a beautiful view of how this whole thing plays out. And but the nanoparticulate matters by James Chang were patented in 1990-91. Now, it's kind of interesting. So I was doing this research on James Chang because I was interested, because he lived in Tustin, California. You can look this up, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not making it up. Now, here's the deal. James Chang lived 2 blocks from my in-laws. I drove by his house almost every day for several years, and did it up until 2000. Up until 2000. His residence. And I thought to myself, you got to be kidding me. Grove Site Drive. I mean, to me, so that was a relationship. I drove by his house every day. Huh. But the point is, these patents are out there, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, the time in which he patented this and the time in which spraying began, there is a direct correlation to the increase in explosion of autism. I mean, in 1990, I don't know when you were in education, but I can remember very few autistic children were in schools. You never saw that. You didn't have a lot of autistic children. Now everybody's got autism. Well, why? Well, it's because we've been spraying them with nanoparticulate particles, in my opinion. And the vaccines have come into that, and that's another part of it. But there's a direct correlation. You can just see the graph that correlates perfectly to the times of maximum spraying that they've been doing. This is a global effort, by the way. And see, people can't come to that term or that position to understand the global effort by geoengineering. And it is. Now, one of the things that really tipped me about the evidence for this, because I was still, when I got a lot of information, I was still very doubtful, and I said, well, you haven't talked to anybody who's actually a witness to this. And well, I live in a community where there's an Air Force base, Beale Air Force Base, highly top secret. It's where the drones are all flying from, and U-2s and everything, rich history. And I was able to make contact, not from Beale, but from other places that, people talk. And I was able to make contact with 3 pilots. And they've flown those missions of spraying the chemicals. And I got pretty good interviews with them. And these are high-ranking people. They're no longer in the Air Force. But they were flying the missions. And Dave, I mean, so to me, as a science guy, gee whiz, you've got your witnesses. These are very, very credible people. And, you can see it in the skies here in California. And there's cause and effect. In fact, I'll tell you right now, if you go back and if somebody wants to do this, please do. Go back and check out your weather patterns that were happening over California a week in advance of the fires in Tennessee. And you'll see there was no spraying going on, which is interesting for Northern California. Because normally what happens when there's a lot of spraying going on, there's usually flooding in the central part of the country, or in the East Coast, or in Tennessee, Texas in particular. When we get highly dosed with chemicals, there's going to be a flood that's going to happen somewhere, or there's going to be some sort of weather modification taking place within 2 to 3 days after the events. We see this all the time. And prior to the Tennessee fires, there were none of the chemtrails that we normally see up in the skies for days. And people on our Tea Party and everybody, see, look, we're not stupid around here. Like I said, there's a lot of Air Force personnel running around that retired or used to work at the base. They get it. They get it. They see this.
Well, I get it too, because I've heard this before, but in a different context. And I'm going to throw a name at you you've probably heard of, Nick Begich.
Yeah.
And Nick has been on the quiet side lately, but he did the seminal work on Project HAARP.
Right.
And Project HAARP was about electrifying the ionosphere, and you move the ionosphere, therefore you alter the weather. And I know for a fact, and I've seen the patents, Nick has put all this together in a book he wrote in the 90s called Angels Don't Play This HAARP. And he had the patents from Bernard Eastman and all others that basically said this is what they can do. And they tell you right there. And by the way, I've written extensively on Air Force owning the weather 2025. And I know people that were connected to this. And I've interviewed them privately for confidential sources. And we have this technology that you're speaking about. But what we're looking at here, what you're talking about, is when they do these chemtrails, they're also linking into the ionosphere.
Right.
It's all part of the same thing. And you're right. They do something in California to get an effect in Kansas.
That's correct. And we can predict the weather here. I mean, I have a relative who lives in Texas and who thought I was absolutely out of my mind. But he moved to Texas recently, or over a year and a half ago. And it was interesting because I was telling him, well, watch out for the floods. Well, of course, when he moved in, they started flooding. When he opened up his business, he was flooded out. It was a brand new business. The day he opened up his business, they closed everything up. They got all the remodel done of the building. And the Monday they were going to come in to do business, they were flooded out because of this. And so now I got a believer, of course. But we can predict the weather here with the ramifications. We can't exactly know where it's going to be because you've got these HAARP devices that are kind of moving things around. And, that sort of thing. But high-frequency active auroral research project is what you're talking about with HAARP. And these are real. You can look them up. We're not making this stuff up. And they've been doing all kinds of stuff all around the globe with HAARP, including causing earthquakes. Because, the low frequency that they use can actually, and they do use HAARP to look for oil in oil shales. And they can create mini earthquakes. They know this.
Yeah, I'm well aware of the earthquake potential. And on the document from Air Force Owning the Weather 2025, they list how they do it. They have the patents, right. And you can look at the descriptions in the footnotes.
Yeah, so those people that think that you and I are making this stuff up, we're not. And they're using it right now against us. Right now as we speak. And this whole thing with the droughting out California is a classic example of that. We've seen this, we've been talking about it, and now all of a sudden it's come to fruition.
Well, I want to go back to what I said earlier and connect a couple dots here, Paul. You've got Feinstein's husband involved in relocating farmers off farmland that has been overtilled, overfarmed, and they're forcibly making them work as laborers in factories created in the Go Cities.
Right.
But on the other hand, you've got the same group, along with the Chinese and the Chinese military, that are going to take control of California farmland. Are they setting up their own breadbasket here?
Yes.
To take it back there.
Yes, exactly right.
I want to connect one more dot. For the life of me, I'd have to go back and research. I can't recall it. There's an online university that issued an analysis of the California drought, and I took them to task because they weren't set up to do this kind of research. They had no business venturing down this path, and they were saying basically California is going to need outside help. And I'm not kidding. This is exactly what they concluded. And I concluded from that, from other things that I found with UN documentation, that the UN was planning to take over California. And I said the drought will force a migration, and then people will vacate, and then the UN will take over. So let's go back to CalExit. Is the UN a player in CalExit, and could the UN actually be in charge, at least for a while?
That's the plan with CalExit, is that they will turn over sovereignty to the United Nations as a nation.
Is that an intermediary step, or is that a permanent step?
That's a permanent. No, that's what they planned. That's their plan. They're going to turn themselves over to the sovereignty of the United Nations. That's in their plan. That's what they talk about.
I don't like to do the "I told you so" thing, and I'm not saying that to you because I never told you this. But you know what? I said this in an article 2 years ago.
Well, yeah, and the other part of it too is the United Nations. I don't know if it's been because of your article, but the United Nations actually has a plan for refugees from California because of the drought. They put a plan together for that.
Yes. In fact, the guy that's in charge of it is named Peter Sutherland. He's the head of the migration group
Right.
From the UN, and there's a title for it. It's, once again, I got to go back and look at my notes from 24 months ago. But Peter Sutherland, listen to his credentials, Paul. He is the former president of the Bank of Ireland, and that's about as innocuous as it gets. He is was the head of the Western European Division of the Trilateral Commission. He's a Bilderberg attender. This guy is a globalist.
Well, it's kind of interesting because this is something that's really kind of actively playing out right now as we speak, because there's a big movement in Jefferson, of course, as you know, to form the 51st state. That's a legal, lawful process to do that. It's constitutionally correct to do it. It's legal to do it. We've been following all attorneys. We have attorneys that have been helping us with this, and we've been following every legal recourse to form a new state, put another star on the flag of 51st state to create a more perfect union. And in fact, the way this is starting to look like with this CalExit program and so on, that the successful formation of a new state, a 51st state of Jefferson, will in fact actually save the rest of California as a state.
Why is that?
Well, because I think that's going to rattle enough people in California. People in California are just like everybody else in the United States. They don't get it at first, but when they start to learn what the process and procedure is, and they start to learn that CalExit is not a fun and little game thing, like many people might think initially, say, oh yeah, CalExit, the liberal mind just jumping all over it. But once, people in California start to figure out this is meaning leaving the whole nation and becoming your own nation. And this is what they're preaching on these websites. California is the 6th largest economy. We need to be our own nation. That's called sedition, by the way. There's a name for that, and that's illegal, and they are being seditious. So that's why I say these people are really illegally going to get themselves in trouble, especially the politicians that are engaging in this. And they are engaging it. They're talking about it at the state capitol. So people are going to start to discern the difference. And California will have to give up Jefferson. I don't see any other recourse for them but to do that. And they're going to have to follow the process. There's a number of different things that are happening. I'm not going to reveal them on radio right now. But by their own hand, they're going to deliver Jefferson as a new state. But in that process, the rest of California will wake up and realize they're going to be California and stay California and not an independent nation, because that'll never happen. Not as long as this union's together, it's not going to happen. This nation's together. The last time this was happening was the Civil War. And I don't think people want to spill, another, probably rather the numbers of 700,000 will probably be, several million people being killed. By agents of the outside, I might add. That's the thing. All these people that are going to be here to kill Americans and so on, in a so-called, whether it's a national revolution or revolution here in California, are people that are really illegal immigrants or people that are brought in from the outside. They're not Americans, and they're not Californians.
They have been planning the breakup of the United States for various reasons for a very long time.
Right.
If you notice on the front page of the paper where they've got this article residing, is California splitting away? A group believes California should form its own nation. And you've got folks out there with their communist, red stars and fists in the air, and the whole thing's called Yes California. And it goes on to say, Marcus Ruiz Evans of the Yes California Independence Campaign talks to passersby about California seceding from the United States and becoming its own nation because Trump has been elected, and how they think they've got the numbers and how they're opening cultural centers in other parts of the world. This is just truly sickening. And now they got a bunch of Democrats who are supporting it. Globalists are financing movements to break this country up. And so globalism is the annexation of the entire republic into a new political order that's completely authoritarian, tax-exempt, with diplomatic immunity above the law, the very definition of a tyranny, of a despotism. And so that's why globalism and the TPP and NAFTA and GATT and all this is so unconstitutional and is anathema to a free society. Trump is trying to re-annex the republic back into the system that our founders set up. And that's why the would-be conquerors of this country that thought they finally had us completely dominated with this last election, if Hillary would have gotten in, they would have sewed it up. 5 more Supreme Court justices, you name it. It'd have been pretty much game over without a physical war. And the globalists need to know that our military and others are fully aware of what's going on now, because the message was put out there. Thank God you guys were so arrogant inside the globalist think tanks, you thought you were invincible. You had no idea what we were building, what we were doing. But I will assure you that our energy outmatches you 10 to 1. and the historical sexiness of Americana and freedom is something you're not going to be able to defeat no matter how soft you make the public. There'll always be a large minority of people of every race, color, and creed that want freedom who will outproduce, outperform, and will not comply with you, and will, by just the very existence of our cultural prowess, be the hottest game in town. Pretty simple. You can't compete with us because you're anti-competition innately. So California is a bunch of sad losers. It's a beautiful state, a lot of great people. And of course, their delusion to break away from the larger whole just shows what a cult they're in and how pathetic and butthurt they are and how untraveled they are and how stupid they are. And they don't realize they're a corporate renter colony, a bunch of ultra-rich that have set up a system where they're basically exempt from all the regulations and garbage they foist on the serfs below. But if you watch Mark Dice videos, we've had our own crew out there as well. Californians, on average, the young trendies, are the dumbest group of people you've ever seen, and they really are an example of what Victor Hugo, the French philosopher, said, that adversity makes men, prosperity makes monsters. These are spoiled, dangerous brats because they are for full tyranny against all of us if they think it secures us to continue for their meal ticket. So this is modern slavery of the giant unwashed masses being directed as a weapon system by the globalist above. Pressure from above, pressure from below, another form of the Hegelian dialectic or problem-reaction solution.
Okay, so what do you think? I think we put together some pretty good evidence that there's a connection between CalExit and the UN and the California engineered drought, which I've been talking about for quite a while now. I remember doing posts from a couple years ago talking about how they're going to engineer this drought until such time as they're ready to turn the water back on, because they will have sold all of the land that's worth anything for pennies on the dollar, and then new people moving in who can buy it up for next to nothing because everyone else is gone. And that seems to be what's playing out as far as the farmland and stuff goes. Now, I remember thinking that the UN had to be involved in some capacity, but I didn't know anything about the Chinese troop movements and the infiltration of the Chinese and the Russians into California. Okay, let's take a look at an article here on Dave Hodges' website, Elected Officials and Gangsters Conspiring to Overthrow California by Any Means Possible. Here you can see a picture of El Presidente, Jerry Brown, who apparently wants to be the president of California, who I might add is serving an illegal third term as the governor of California currently. Dave has quite a bit of information in this article. I won't read the whole thing to you, but you can definitely go check it out if you're interested. CalExit versus the state of Jefferson, the participants in the planned violent overthrow of California. An insider eyewitness speaks out. There's quite a bit of info here, and I thought the conclusion was pretty good. He says the developing facts in this case are unfolding, and this situation is very fluid, not to mention highly volatile. There will no doubt be follow-up reports on the progress of this criminal enterprise. The readers can be certain that many government officials are conspiring with known criminal entities to subvert both the California and the U.S. constitutions. I think that's key in this whole thing. And then he says, Dave says he is stunned by the totality of the criminal element that is participating in the breakup of California and how that criminal element is partnering with elected officials, both federal and state, as they conspire to commit treason against the United States as well as California. Okay, that's all for the Diamond Report for today. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.